Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of our podcast. Guys, this week we are honored to have Craig Ballantyne on the podcast for a third time. And for those of you that don't know, Craig is known as the world's most disciplined man. We're going to talk about discipline today, but he's also a business coach for the world's most high-performing entrepreneurs across all verticals. He's written 3 to 4 books already, The Perfect Week Formula, Perfect Day Formula, and the Wall Street Journal bestseller, Unstoppable. He's also owns Early to Rise. He lives in Vancouver. He lives in Mexico. He travels all over the world. He's here today to talk about his latest book, The Dark Side of Discipline. Stop chasing, suffer less, and achieve more. It's already a USA Today featured bestseller. Craig, thank you so much for coming back on.
Man, this is going to be a lot of fun.
This is going to be a lot of fun. This is an interesting topic. Discipline, we see it on social media everywhere. We've all seen Jocko's quotes. We've seen tons and tons of different variations of it. And you have an interesting take on discipline. It's not cold plunging. No. It's not joining the 5A club. It's not living with a Navy SEAL. It means putting 10x effort into a 10x problem in your life.
Yeah, absolutely.
Can you share a little bit about what made you write this book?
It's a bit of a heartbreaking story, to be honest with you. It's been 6 years since I wrote the last book, The Perfect Week Formula, and I was, very busy in the coaching space, but watching the trends of, the discipline challenges and the cold plunges, really rise up in the world. And one of my friends went down this rabbit hole. He is a very successful entrepreneur. He was married, couple kids, fancy red sports car, 6-pack abs, multi-million-dollar business. So he had it all, right? And then, he went on this thing, his phone, and opened up his Instagram Explorer page, and somebody told him that he wasn't disciplined, right? Because he hadn't done their challenge, right? He hadn't done their list of random activities done for a random number of times. Like one of the ones I always like to really bust on is 100 push-ups in 100 days. Well, why 100 push-ups in 100 days? Why not 101 push-ups in 101 days? Like, it's just ridiculous. Like they're all just these random things. And so my friend, who I already knew was very busy dude. I'd been in his house, I'd actually whiteboarded out a customized perfect week with him and his wife in the room because they had a lot of challenges about him working so much. So he had this business that was keeping him busy. He had this family that should have been keeping him busy. So where the heck is he getting an extra 2 hours a day to go and do these challenges that required him to work out twice a day, read 20 pages or something, cold plunge, all this stuff? And I was like, man, I'm just going to watch this play out. And as it played out, it ended up with his wife saying, see you later. I'm taking the kids. You're not paying attention to us. So he was putting a level 10 effort into a level 1 problem, which was getting more disciplined, quote unquote, more disciplined. He was already disciplined and successful, but he's putting a level 10 effort into it. But his level 10 problem, which was his marriage and his family, was getting a level 1 effort. And so I call him and myself and, you and pretty much everybody listening to this, we're all wild horses. We want to have it all. We want to do it all. We want to travel all the world. We want to just accomplish everything. And listen, that's a beautiful thing. But you can't have it all. You can have anything, but you can't have everything, right? You can be a master at a small number of things, but you can't be a master at everything. Even no matter what Tim Ferriss's TV show and books tried to tell us about, becoming a master at everything just with a little bit of time. The truth is, if you want to become a master, you gotta focus, and you have to have the discipline to say no. And I watched my friend lose his marriage, and I've been watching all sorts of other people miss out on their biggest dreams because they were chasing the good. And that's the irony of the dark side of discipline, right? Like a cold plunge, hey, it's good. But a cold plunge done, like if you drive 15 minutes because you don't have one at your house, you drive 15 minutes to the cold plunge place, you do a cold plunge, you get toweled off, have your shower and your sauna or whatever, you come back home, it's 45 minutes, 60-minute round trip. And deep inside of you is this dream to write a book. And the only time of day that you have to write this book is you've decided to use it for cold plunging. Well, now you're letting the good get in the way of the great. Like my friend let the discipline challenges, the good of those things, get in the way of the great of his family. And that's where discipline has the dark side and can destroy you.
Ooh, that is powerful. And it's interesting because you've been doing this for 27, 28 years now.
Yeah, man.
And you've seen it all. You've seen all the challenges out there. There's 75 hard. There's a million of them. And we get into these cycles of mastering a challenge versus mastering what really matters in our life. And for a lot of people, like you said, it's their family. You wake up in the morning and, you're very busy during the day, and then you jump into these random routines that leave you in a cycle of going nowhere.
Well, I think this is the bottom line here is we wake up in the morning with a level 10 problem in our life. And if anybody's sitting there thinking, what the heck is my level 10 problem? You know what it is. It's that thing that you get up at 2 o'clock in the morning and start thinking about, or it's that thing when you wake up in the morning and it's cloudy out and all of a sudden it changes your mood and you go back to this problem in your mind. And in most cases, it's a difficult conversation. It might be with a business partner, an investor, your spouse. It's a difficult conversation. There's a level 10 problem. Now, that level 10 problem is scary. Not only is it scary, you don't want to have the difficult conversation. Nobody likes having difficult conversation. But not only that, it's also like a giant ship. It's really hard to turn around. Like if you got a marriage, like maybe you've been married 15 years. I use this example a lot because it resonates. So you've been married 15 years. Now your kids are 10 and 12. You and your wife are like Uber drivers. You see each other 5 minutes a day because she's going out the door because she's driving one kid to one sport. You're going out the door because you're driving another kid to another activity. Hey, how you doing? See you later. We'll chat at night. You don't. You both crash and you fall asleep. This goes on for long enough. The marriage goes from warm, because it goes from hot, honeymoon, then the kids come along and it cools down, and then, you're so busy and it just cools down. Now the marriage is cold, right? And you're like, man, we got to do something about this. But if I bring it up, she might think I want a divorce, and then, so you let the molehill become a mountain. Meanwhile, on the flip side, it's so much easier. Just go and start a YouTube channel or go and get a triathlon bike and join your buddies who are doing triathlons. And all of a sudden, you're going down the rabbit hole on these ultra marathons and stuff because the level 10 problem is just too scary and too darn big. And you're putting it off. And that's what this book is about, because you can go and you're just using everything else as a perverse form of procrastination or even entertainment. Like cold plunging. A lot of people, it's like, how many likes can I get on my cold plunge today? Can I be, there's this one guy I see, and you've probably seen him too. He goes to Stanford, I guess, and he's from Iceland. And he has these videos where he's in the cold plunge. It's an ice bath with these girls, and they're barely have, even their legs covered in ice. And he gets in the cold plunge and dunks his head under, and they're beautiful girls from I don't know. Have you seen that one? It has like 100 million. I've seen 100 million views, man. And so everybody sees that and goes, you know what? I'm going to go in cold plunge and I'm going to make my video, and because people are going to like it. And it's like, okay, that's nice. That's good. But have you had the conversation with your spouse about what's bothering them? About what they're going through? Have you listened empathetically and communicated empathetically? Have you put a level 10 effort into your marriage today? And the answer is, in too many cases, is no. Or with that business partner who said he was going to come in and do 50% of the work, he's doing 5% of the work. You're doing 95% of the work. But oh man, I don't know. I don't want to. And if I say anything to him or her, she's going to get upset, and our lead investor is going to be, going to take their money out. Oh my gosh, I'm not going to say anything, and that type of stuff just blows up in your face. And so, the book is really a filter. It's really a filter in many, many ways about, is the thing that I'm doing serving me, or am I serving it? Every habit that we have in our lives, every activity that we do, it should serve us. It should be helpful to us. But in some cases, we just go too far and we're serving the thing, right? Like I talk about it in the book because, Naval Ravikant has a great quote. He says, you cannot write the book until you've lived the book. Ooh. You cannot write it until you've lived it. I live the dark side of discipline. I used to be socially anxious, binge drinking, broke personal trainer. Discipline was my savior to get me up to the next level, right? It brought me out of that. It was my lifeline. Like 75 Hard is a lifeline for obese, overweight individuals. But if you're already a high performer, discipline, there's this thin line where you cross over and all of a sudden discipline becomes your master. And for me, I had a workout streak that I joke about in the book of 1,000 days. And I traveled to Europe all the time in the summertime. I did this entrepreneurship camp in Lithuania, of all places. And I lived in Toronto. And so I had to get to the camp. So I would fly overnight from Toronto to Copenhagen, and then from Copenhagen to Lithuania, and I get there the next night. Where am I going to get my workout in that day? Well, I got it in the bathroom of the SAS lounge at the Copenhagen airport. and and I remember I'm doing push-ups on the bathroom floor, and I'm like, what kind of idiot am I, right? And it's easy to laugh. Everybody's listening to this going, well, this guy is kind of he's a crazy Canadian, and it's ridiculous. It is truly, truly ridiculous. But there's so many of us, that we're reading the book a week, but we never make time to write that book that is, our big hope and dream. And we're doing all of these things that get in the way. They're good things, but not when they sacrifice the great. So we're always looking for to run everything through that filter of, is it serving me or am I serving it? And also, another way to look at it, is this activity necessary or sufficient for success? Is it necessary or sufficient?
That is very powerful. And I'm curious for you, I have so many notes on your book, but I'm curious for you personally, because you've coached a lot of people and you've worked with entrepreneurs at all different levels, but even for yourself. So you mastered discipline early. When did you become self-aware that you were putting 10x effort into things that weren't 10x priorities or 10x levers in your life?
I mean, I would say that moment, that workout in time was one. There was a lot of times where, I was on the road a lot as an entrepreneur before the pandemic. And there were times when I was coming home. It's like Friday night. I'm taking a cab home from the airport. It's, 8:00. I'm lonely. And I'm like, what am I, I'm grinding way too hard because I'm taking every speaking engagement. I'm, sticking to this rigid routine and I'm sacrificing things, but it's not worth what I'm sacrificing. And so there was a lot of moments where I was like, what I'm doing is not right. But it's kind of like, I used to be a personal trainer, and I used to train a lot of people that were cardio addicts, right? Like 25 years ago, everybody thought you had to do 6 or 8 hours of cardio a week in order to lose weight. Now that's ridiculous because of CrossFit and many other things. But back in the day, I had talked people off the ledge, right? Like they're doing 6 hours a week and they came to me and I told them to do basically none. It's very difficult to go from that one extreme to the other extreme. And I was stuck in that same state. I was living like a Gary Vee lifestyle of always on the road and always working. And it's like, it's difficult for you to go from 110 miles an hour. And everybody knows this, like if you've ever driven really fast on the freeway, when you drop it down to the speed limit, you're like, man, I am crawling along here. I don't like this. I got to pick it back up. And it's the same for me during that time. I had to really fight and build better systems in order to get more out of my life and free up time for what really mattered. Because it was kind of ironic for me. I knew what I really wanted, and yet I was going in a different direction. And it was just really hard to get off that path because you almost get addicted to the routines, the systems, and the feedback that I was getting from people like, oh, you're so productive. You're so disciplined. I wish I was like you. And I was like, okay, well, I guess I'm doing the right thing. But I was doing good stuff that was getting in the way of the great for me. And so I just had to chip away at it. And I had to reach out. One of the things that we talk about in the book is that part of the effortless discipline systems is connection and accountability. And I had to share my vision of what I really wanted in my life. And I shared that with my mentors, and they held me accountable to getting off the wrong track and getting onto the right track.
Ooh, there's a lot there. No, Craig, during that time, what did you want in your life? Like, what were you working towards? And what are you working towards now? Because you're at a very advanced level. Like, sure. What was that for you?
Well, so you've read The Perfect Day Formula. I wrote The Perfect Day Formula in 2015 when I was a younger single guy, not young, but younger. And, in 2019, I was still single. I hadn't found the woman yet. And so that was the thing that I was always working towards in my mind. But if you looked at my actions, they were almost misaligned, right? It's like you're always on the road. You're skipping out on social events because you got to stay so disciplined to your routine. And I was hurting myself. And so, I raised my hand. I set my ego aside and raised my hand and asked for help. Ooh. And I got help in the form of connection. And I want everybody to write this down because this is a philosophy that I live by that changes my life over and over and over again. Everything in life is easier when you know more good people.
Ooh.
Everything in life is easier when you know more good people. And I'll use an extreme example. Let's say, you're married with kids and you want to take the kids to Disneyland. If you only know 10 people and you say, hey, what are the best tips on going to Disneyland? you're not going to get very good advice. But if you know 1,000 people and you go to them and you say, hey, taking the kids to Disneyland, what are your favorite tips and tricks? You're going to get a lot of advice, right? You're going to get a lot of good advice. And I know that's like an analogy that most people don't care about, but that's just an example of the situation. And so everything in my life, I've corrected my behavior. And when I got in great shape, I had a great training partner. Most of the money I've made has been through some partnership with somebody, whether it was, getting a mentor or a coach or a business partner, a joint venture partner, or somebody showing me how to do something better. And then when I met my wife, it was because I went to a few girls. So this is actually really great advice for any single guy out there, because I realized through reflection, a lot of my changes come through reflection of what I'm doing wrong and right. I realized that most of my greatest relationships were always like an introduction or part of the social circle that I was involved with. And I was like, I just need more introductions. I'm not going out there. I'm not the guy going to, whether it's a business event and meeting some girl at the bar. It's just not my style. And so I need help. I need the introductions from somebody. So I went to my 3 female friends that had the largest social circles. And they knew me well enough to be able to make the introduction to. And one of them was this girl, Vanessa, who ran the Toronto ladies business community. And I said, Vanessa, I need your help. You know me. We've been friends. We've even gone on dates, but she, I know I wasn't her type. And so I said, Vanessa, you know me. Please introduce me to some of your friends. And so she sends me 5 Instagram profiles, and I go, nope. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm the most ungrateful person in the world. So here's what I do. This is ridiculous, but here's what I do. I go through who she follows on Instagram. These tiny circles, right? I go through 30 of them. I see one. I go, a tiny circle. And I go, I would like to meet this girl. So I picked my wife from a tiny circle on Instagram. Eventually she made the introduction. We hit it off. But if I didn't know Vanessa, and how did I meet Vanessa? I met Vanessa through a matchmaker. And I met the matchmaker through my friend Joe Polish, who is one of the most connected men in the world. And I met Joe Polish through my event coordinator from the first business seminar in 2007. And how did I even know my business coordinator, my event coordinator? I met my event coordinator through my first mentor, Yannick Silver. And I met Yannick Silver through an email newsletter that I was on. So you see like the dominoes to me meeting my wife all started because of each stage was a good person that I added into my life. And so we always have this phrase, don't be on Lonely Entrepreneur Island, because Lonely Entrepreneur Island is where entrepreneurial dreams go to die, right? Like, even if you're in Silicon Valley, you're surrounded by a lot of people. But if you have a tech startup and you're in the middle of nowhere, in flyover states or something like that, or even in other populous states where you're just not in a big city where there's not a lot of entrepreneurs, and you go to an event and you come home and you're all jazzed up, and now you go back and you spend all your time with your brother-in-law who's in corporate and all he does is golf, and your partner and spouse don't understand you, and your brothers and your sisters, they kind of look down on your entrepreneurial dreams. Man, that chips away at you. And that's Lonely Entrepreneur Island. So you got to get off Lonely Entrepreneur Island. You have to stay plugged into online communities. You have to go to events and stuff like that. And for me, 25 years ago, when I started going to events, I was quite introverted. I had very strong introverted tendencies. In fact, every time we go to a Marriott property with my family, they go, oh, you want a room on a low floor? Because it's on my profile. And I go, no, that doesn't matter anymore. Because when I went to events, I would ask for a room on a low floor so that I didn't have to go in the elevator with people, and I would take the stairs. Like, that's how introverted I was.
No way.
Back in the day, man. Like, some embarrassing stuff. But it was through my exposure, through good people, that everything changed. So, I went through a lot of low points in my life figuring things out. There was a lot of highs in there too, but a lot of lonely moments, like those ride homes from the airport on a Friday night when everybody else is out doing something. And here I am coming home from another grinding week because I thought that's what I had to do. And then it was the exposure to all these, mentors and friends who questioned me. It's really important to be around people who will question you and your decisions, and then telling them my dreams, like, hey, I want to, I wrote the 5-year vision in that Perfect Day Formula book that by 2020 I'd be married. 2019, the heat was on. People were asking me all the time, which is another big lesson, that if you want to achieve something, I'm a big believer that you do tell people what you want to achieve. Ooh. Right? Like, hey, listen, Elon's telling everybody that he wants to populate Mars, right? And the people who are attracted to that will go to it. And I'm not, I don't want to talk about Elon politics and all that stuff. But that's a great example. Like, if he didn't tell anybody, then would he be as far ahead as he is with SpaceX and some of the other stuff he's doing? No, he wouldn't be, because nobody knows that's what he wants to do. And therefore, the people that are interested don't know that they should be going and helping him. And so I wrote my book. My Perfect Day Formula book was actually a personal ad in disguise, because the one chapter was devoted to, I'm going to be married to this type of woman, and I described her, and this is my family life that I'm going to have in the future. That was actually a personal ad. And have you ever heard the name Gary Halbert?
No. What is he
Okay,
do?
so Gary Halbert's from the direct response marketing world. He's long passed away. But Gary Halbert was famous in the 1980s. He bought an entire page in the Los Angeles Times. So the main section, the back cover of the main section. So in the 80s, you can imagine how expensive this would be, like $100,000 probably for the page. And he wrote an entire personal ad about what he wanted and what he didn't want in a woman in the 1980s to meet his wife. And he got a ton of hate mail, but he got a ton of like really great people. Like, it's a really extreme example. And so I borrowed that in my Perfect Day Formula to create my vision for my future, that in a way, it didn't directly attract the woman to my world, but it indirectly made me take the action, because people were always hounding me on it. So I kept on taking action, changing, so that I brought that into my life.
Wow. Craig, you are wise. And one of the things that strikes me about you, and this is a big problem for a lot of us men, have big egos. So to ask for help in dating and finding mentors, it's something that a lot of us guys struggle with. And for you, it's super interesting, because I feel like at each portion of your life, each of these transitions, you went and asked for help. I mean, were you naturally a self-aware person? Are you naturally a self-aware person?
I would say that naturally, yes. I think Stoicism, in which we've talked about a lot, really helped. Like when I discovered Epictetus's work and putting an external outside eye on yourself, like you get a lot of that through coaching and mentorship and through friends that ask you hard questions. But if you don't have those people around you, you have to do it yourself. And so even in every situation, like you can get to the point where, like, let's say you're having a tense discussion with somebody, you can actually do it in real time, where you can be having the conversation, and then as soon as you're done saying something, you can be looking with outside eyes at yourself and saying, did you have the right tonality in that? Did you use the right words? Now, obviously, you have to also be paying attention to the response back, but you should be doing it in real time, and then saying, "Oh, I'm never going to start another question like that, because as I listened to it, it sounded very, accusatory and very adversarial. So I got to change my tonality and pitch and pace and tone for the next thing that I say to try and correct course." Because I think all great salespeople would be like that, because they say something, they get a response back, and they adjust. And I think that you have to lean into it and eventually get there, because when you become self-aware, man, you can start to solve a lot of your problems.
Ooh. And do you mind if I ask, what was your upbringing like? Is that too personal?
No, I mean, my upbringing was had nothing to do with personal development. So I grew up on a farm in Canada. We didn't have a lot of money. We weren't dirt poor by any means. We got to go to Disneyland once, before I was in high school. But we wore hand-me-down clothes. My mom was out in the garden all summer making our food, and she was in the house sewing our clothes in the wintertime. My father was an alcoholic, unfortunately, so we didn't have a lot of money. My father was an alcoholic. My parents didn't have a great marriage. My father passed away from cancer way too early, because he never went to the doctor. And so there was a lot of little T trauma, I guess, is the phrase that people use now. There was no physical abuse. There was some mental abuse, and that he yelled a lot. And then I just read a lot, because on the farm back in the 80s, no cable TV, couldn't go over to my friend's house after school. So I'm making stuff up, playing by myself all the time. So I spent a lot of time by myself, but it worked out because I was either had introverted tendencies by nature, or kind of accumulated them. But other than that, everything else was normal. Played sports, had tons of friends. Yeah, everything else was normal. It's just that I read a lot and spent a lot of time thinking in my own head. So introverted by nature, probably contributes to some of the self-awareness.
Ooh. Yeah, I'm always curious, especially with guys like you that are at that elite level of performance and also elite level of self-awareness and growth. A lot of times we get stuck in life, like even just talking about the discipline topic, right? We just get super locked into these random routines or random versions of ourselves of the past. And I'm always curious for guys like you who are constantly transitioning. I mean, you've written a lot of different types of books, and it's all somewhat similar, but a lot of it's growth related. But you're very open, and you're obviously a coach and a mentor for a lot of people. But a lot of us struggle to get out of our own way.
There's a couple of things that when you were saying there that came to my mind. They're totally different, but the first is Madonna. So everybody knows Madonna, the singer. And one thing that, because I grew up, as she became popular and stuff like that, and you've seen her reinvent herself. And I started, like maybe 20 years ago when she was getting a little bit older and really had to reinvent herself, there was a lot of articles about it. And so I think that that's one thing you have to commit to in your life is reinvention every couple of years. And especially for anybody who's listening, who's exited a business, you're like the king, the queen, whatever. And then you exit the business and now, well, you're not running the business anymore. So nobody wants to interview you. Nobody cares anymore. And it's like, man, you got to reinvent yourself. It doesn't necessarily mean you have to go and start another business, but for your own benefit, you have to reinvent yourself so that you feel like there's some value and worth and et cetera. And you may reinvent yourself as a gardener. Like I'm not saying you have to reinvent yourself as another type A type person, but you do have to come up with something to make sure that you feel you have that. The other thing that in terms of the self-awareness is that it goes back to that story I told about the exercise. And again, everybody listening to that saw how ridiculous it was. They were all listening to it like, really? You exercised in a bathroom floor? Like that is so obvious with outside eyes that it's ridiculous. And when I lived in Toronto in the wintertime, you would see there'd be every year there's many, many storms, but there would always be like one really icy winter storm. And you would see these runners out like Bambi out there on the ice, just all over the place, falling down. And you'd look at them and you go like, are you insane? It's you're running on ice in running shoes. But here's the thing. The runner is so locked in, especially a lot of these runners have these so-called streaks, right? I've ran for 3,018 days in a row. And it's a badge of honor, and it's all these pats on the back. It's their dopamine hits. It's their identity. And so when that day happens, not running is not an option to them. But to you and I, we're laughing like, what kind of idiot is out running in an ice storm in Toronto on icy roads with cars driving by? And but to them, that's not a stupid thing, because they're so irrationally locked into it. And so I bring that story up because it's easy to see when other people are acting irrationally. Ooh. And you have to then go, oh, wait a minute. Where am I acting irrationally? Where am I acting irrationally in my life? What am I locked onto? What are my beliefs? What are my assumptions that I am making in my own life that are handicapping me, that are like actually very detrimental to me? Because those runners, I mean, it's not just that you're going to fall and you're going to wipe out. Like you're going to fall and you're going to injure yourself and not be able to run for 6 months. You're going to fall on your head and possibly die, right? It's just like a risk that's not worth it. And everybody's making these decisions in their life where, whether it's like, you're 37 years old and you're going to Vegas every weekend and partying. Like, okay, you're way beyond this. Okay, everybody's looking you in the club and like, no, you're not fitting in anymore. You got to stop doing this. Everybody's making some type of mistake in their life. And when you can look at it with outside eyes, you can save yourself from a lot of damage. Problem is most people aren't able to do that. And the problem is we hang around people who are not going to have the courage to give us their opinion, their unfiltered opinion. So if you don't have those people, you have to go to some type of sounding board, some mentor, some coach, something where you can get somebody to give you, polite but raw feedback on like, hey, I don't think this is good for you.
Michael Siebel's a partner it's a firm called Y Combinator. It's like the top accelerator for founders. And he posted a tweet a few days ago, and he said that the more successful you get, the more important it is to have somebody to tell you that you suck at something, right? Just to kind of keep you in check. And I'm curious for you, Craig, at this stage, do you still have coaches and mentors that you work with?
Oh yeah, totally. So, I had a coach and mentor to launch the book, a guy named Carrie Oberbrunner. Amazing. He taught me so much. He told me how bad my Amazon listings were for all my other books. And I weep for a day about how many book sales that I missed out on. And he goes, man, you got 1,000 book reviews on the Perfect Day Formula, and it's so bad. You must have worked really hard.
No way. It looks great. Yeah. He said that.
Well, it's not that the book was bad. The book is good, but the Amazon listing and the setup of it and all, it was amateur hour basically. Mm-hmm, and so we did everything right. So I got him. And then I have this guy, Pedro who I think I mentioned to you before. Mm-hmm, and he's been, a life changer for me, because he gives me the Armenian death stare whenever I do anything stupid, and which used to happen a lot. And he calls me out on it. And we used to have a podcast together. And at the end of he'd always insert how's the search for your wife going in the podcast to keep me on course. So that's the type of friend where he says hard things with love. They truly are. He's a very empathetic person. And anytime he challenges you, calls you out, pulls you aside, says, hey, bro, I got to talk to you about this. He does it in the absolute best way. And I learned a lot from him. And so I still make sure that I am around those people. And we have our own, I run a coaching business for entrepreneurs, and we have 3 events per year. And I have a team of coaches now, and I get their feedback too. And so my coaches coach me because they're better coaches than I am. But also the people in the room, some of them, we have one guy who's doing $100 million with a fintech company. And he gives me feedback, obviously, because he's very advanced in leadership and bigger ideas. And I get a lot of people telling me you got to think bigger. And that's probably an area where I need the most help and fighting complacency and stuff like that. So I'm always around people. And I can even get it from reading newsletters. Paid newsletters, free newsletters, whether they're about AI or financial investing, or whether they're about health. Reading Dr. Peter Attia's book, Outlive, I thought was a fantastic book. And, there was good feedback in there that got me to do a few changes. And so you can get it in all those things. Because if you go all the way back to Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill, which I'm not sure if your audience is familiar with it, but I imagine most of them are. If you go into Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill, he has a chapter in there about the mastermind. And he had a mastermind in his head full of people like Abraham Lincoln. Now, obviously, Abraham Lincoln was long gone when Napoleon Hill was writing this book. But his whole idea was almost like, what would Jesus do? But what would Abraham Lincoln do? And you can play this game so if you are an Elon Musk fan and you're running a tech company, you would say, well, what would Elon do in this? Let's use his 5-step system for solving problems faster. And, what would he do if he was faced with this level 10 problem in our business right now? How would Elon approach it? What questions would he ask? How can we make this process less dumb? Is one of his famous questions. And so you can use that all the time, even if the person is not there. But it just takes the courage to say, guys, I'm really screwing up here, to the team, and say, hey, team, I'm really screwing up here. I don't know what I'm doing. I need you to fix it. Just because I'm the CEO or founder or whatever, my name's in the newspaper articles doesn't mean I know everything. Help me out. And that's what we all need to do for all the areas of our life.
Oh, that's so good. And it's so important. And I hate to keep bombing you with these questions, but I'm always curious because I'm deep like you. I try to unpack.
Yeah, man.
Ego. Do you ever struggle with ego? Because that's
that's my biggest fight.
Really?
Sure.
Okay. Because it ties into that topic. Getting that help, especially when you're at the level that you're at. Because in the beginning, when you suck, it's you need to learn. But when you're at a very advanced level like you, and you're around all these high performing people, ego.
Yeah, totally, man. Totally. Because here's the thing is, let's just use Facebook ads as a thing, right? So you can be at a stage where it's I don't know anything about Facebook ads. And it's so it's easy to go and buy some books and hire some coaches and stuff. And then you start doing it for a while. But then ads are changing all the time, and what works and what doesn't work. And, you make one change and all of a sudden everything's blown up, or you might have your ads account disabled. That's when it's hardest to ask for help, because especially if you've been played up as an expert. And if you have been, now you've got this story in your mind of either A, well, I'm the expert, I should know this. Nobody else can be able to help me. Or, oh man, how can I now go from here and go down to here and say, I actually don't know what I'm doing. Ooh. Like, if you can do that, and because you truly need that help, you are like one of the most courageous people in the world, because the majority of people will never, ever do that. And that, there's areas, I'm really good in asking help for my marriage. I'm really good in asking help for raising our kids. I'm not that great at asking for help in the sales and marketing. I'm getting better because, we're like not any business, but most businesses have ups and downs and stuff like that. And we go through it. And we're going through one right now we have really good marketing, but our sales conversion is not as good as it should be. And it's painful because it's like, what we deliver is so great. Why can't, everybody just accept that our mousetrap is the best mousetrap ever? But just because you built a better mousetrap doesn't mean you're going to get the customers, as the old saying goes. And so I'm setting my ego aside. I'm asking, some people that are even our customers who are sales experts, like, hey, come in, dissect this, tell me what's wrong. What am I doing wrong? How can I improve this? And even like on Instagram, I was really good at Instagram up until about 2021, 22. And then I don't know if I was too aggressive in the way that I posted content or whatever it was, but now like it's really hard for me it was really hard for me for the past couple of years to get results on Instagram. So now I'm like doing a deep dive and asking all these people and getting a lot of different approaches, because there's a lot of different approaches that you can take, but things are starting to pick back up again, because I'm kind of putting like my own twist on one of my friends' approaches and, making sure that I'm doing content that's authentic to me. But man, I was embarrassed by my Instagram for like the last couple of years, because it's not, I was embarrassed by the content. I was embarrassed by the results, that there was hardly any. And especially because from 2018 to 2021, like I was making bank on internet, on Instagram. Like it was just almost, it was easy. It was easy, fun, lucrative. It was a elf business, as my friend Joe Polish called it. And then you ran into some trouble. So things change. And that's where, when things change in your industry, I mean, there's a lot of people who were running crazy app businesses. Now AI comes along, like you better make sure that you got AI into your app, or otherwise, some guy's going to come along who just started their business 3 months ago and eat your lunch and get all your investor money. And it's like, you're like last week's news. You're no longer relevant. I mean, you have to let go of the ego, and it is very difficult. And I think that, there's a lot of Eastern approaches, from the basics of like meditation, that you need to incorporate in order to have the courage to do it.
Ooh. And it does take a lot of courage. It takes a lot of courage to ask for help. And for you, I'm interested, that's funny you say that about your social media, because you have a shitload of followers and your content does well, but your standards are so high.
Sure.
And with ego, it's hard when you're really, 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 really good at something, especially to your level. And then you have to go ask for help. And the next question, because this is something.
The thing is, you have to ask for help. And who do you have to ask help for? You're like some 23-year-old who's like, has figured out the next version of it. And you're like, oh my gosh, I'm going to some kid who's like half my age. Yeah. And, because I've been doing this, as you said, I've been doing this for a long time. I've got all these kids like, they used to like call me brother. Then they called me uncle. Now some kid the other day referred to me as like, you're the grandfather of this guy. I'm like, well, technically I could be, but I'm not. So like these backhanded compliments you're getting, and you're like, all right, I'm just going to let that one slide. Because it's not important, right? You got to filter what's important and not important.
You're in the OG mode. Now, can you do that at home? Like, how do you go to be like this dominant person in business, this driven?
And then get dominated by toddlers, man.
The toddlers or your wife. Like, can you take feedback from people who are not in business?
Yeah, absolutely. I absolutely can. I think that my wife and I had a lot of difficult conversations before we got married, which I think was absolutely critical. I think we had conversations that, I would say like 90% of people who've been married 7 to 10 years have never had, just about clarity, vision. We have core values for our family. We were well prepared to weather the craziness of the pandemic, that probably split apart a lot of families, because the spouses were not on the same page on some very important things, but we were, because we figured it out in advance. And so my wife has taught me how to take the feedback. My coaching team has taught me how to take better feedback. I think age and mellowness has taught me, I'm not the hot-headed know-it-all anymore.
Were you before?
Oh man. Yeah. I was,
you had a big ego.
My teenage years, I was the worst. And then I've slowly chipped away at it over the years. But yeah, I thought I knew it all for sure. And that really stunted my growth in a lot of areas, because I could have hired a coach financially about 3 years before I first hired a business coach. And I should have, because, I think of the money that's left on the table, the books that could have been written, the people that I could have helped if I would have asked for help sooner. The irony of when you ask for help is that, because yesterday I was doing this call for another group, and this lady was asking about how to put a level 10 effort into her level 10 problem and have a very difficult conversation with her spouse. And she was sharing stuff. She said, I feel like I'm airing my dirty laundry here. And the thing is that I should have spoken up. I didn't get a chance. I thought of it after, but a reframe of that is when, she wasn't sharing her dirty laundry. What she was saying was what was on the minds of, 30% of the other people who were on the call, who were too scared to answer or to ask the same question. And she was asking, and I coached her through it, and it was a very valuable situation. And everybody doesn't put their, those people who struggle to put their ego aside do so because they fear what other people are going to think of them. The truth is that nobody thinks you're perfect. Everybody's already, got a reason to talk about you behind your back. It's just the way that humans are. So, somebody's already talking about you. You may as well give them something juicy to talk about, and you benefit from it. And at the end of the day, the expert's not judging you. Experts happen to help. Everybody else around you is benefiting as well, because you had the courage to say it, and then you solve your problem, and then everybody forgets about it and moves on to something else. And that's just the reality of it. And it's so much better to be embarrassed that way than to let the problem become so big that it bankrupts your dream, and then you get embarrassed that way. You're going to get embarrassed one way or another, right? You're either getting embarrassed because you set your ego aside, you ask a question that makes you feel embarrassed, you get an answer, and you go and grow your business. Or your ego is so strong that you refuse to be embarrassed voluntarily, that you later on get embarrassed involuntarily because your business fails. You're going to get embarrassed. Choose which one you want. And that's the bottom line.
Ooh. And do you find a lot of your coaching clients, do they have that struggle? If they're in coaching, they're open to it, but it's still...
Yeah. You think so, right? So they're open to the idea of coaching. There's different levels, right? We get people who say, I want to know more about your coaching. So they're open to that. Are they open to getting on a call about the coaching? That's another level of being open. Then there's a level of open to saying, yes, I'm open to officially having a relationship with a coach. But that doesn't mean you're open to coaching, because that then takes another level. Because, we work with a lot of people in financial services, and they tend to be older, both male and female, right? So 50, 55, 60, with not a lot of history in personal development. And so therefore, their experience in coaching, sometimes it's the first time they've ever had a coach.
Oh.
And so they don't like to share. It's difficult to pull the information out. They're low energy on the calls, and it's challenging. And we have to repeatedly educate them on what coaching actually is. It's, hey, as coaches, we're going to ask a lot of questions so that we get the information to help you then see which direction in which to go. And then we're going to hold you accountable to following through on the agreement that we made that, is of the actions that you're going to take. That's all encompassing about the coaching part. But each person can get stuck there. They can, first of all, not even give you enough information. They can be very short in their answers. So they're open to hiring a coach, but are they open to coaching? Are actually two different levels. And then there's a level and level and level until you get to the point where, you're willing to share everything that needs to be shared. You're willing to admit that you don't know what you don't know. You're willing to then go back to your team and say, hey, I didn't know, I got a coach. Here's what our plan is. And then also be open to being accountable, because we have some people go, yep, awesome, I'm going to go and do these things, and then we try and hold them accountable. We're checking in on them, we don't hear from them, they ghost us because they're okay with making a plan, but going back to reality with the plan and they're not okay with, like, they're too locked into their current existence and their current way of doing things. And we've talked about a new way of doing things. And for some, maybe they're too scared to take the new thing to their team. Maybe they're just, they just set in their ways, and so on and so forth. So there's level upon level upon level of being open to coaching.
Ooh. Yeah. And I think especially for some, because you have something about you that people trust you, people are going to like you, but the depth of your work and there's depths to coaching, right? There's the awareness that you need coaching. There's the depth of execution, but there's also the depth of understanding. And even what you're doing now with discipline, right? Like, there's a new way of being disciplined that will actually get you the results. And I think for a lot of the old school cats, and actually for a lot of people today, is when you're at that kind of level of self-awareness and depth, I think at times it can be hard to reach people because they may want to understand, but they just don't get it, especially if you're doing the same way. Like the finance guys, especially wealth managers or the bankers, they've been doing the same stuff for like 20 years. They're getting results. They think they need coaching, but then when they talk to somebody like you have depth, and it could probably be challenging for some of those guys.
Everything's challenging because everybody has these objections, right? It's like, okay, you could be younger. Well, you're younger, you don't understand. You're not in the industry. That's another one that we get. Like, we coach a lot of financial services, from fractional CFOs to wealth managers, et cetera. Are we wealth managers? No, none of our coaching staff has actually spent time in wealth management. We have one that used to have a mortgage brokering company, but none of us are wealth managers. None of us are CFOs. We don't know the technical things, but none of that stuff really matters. What really matters is the systems that you're doing for productivity, the systems for leading your team. These are all, cross promotional across, multiple industries. And so I have like I said, the coaching client I mentioned before, they're at $100 million run rate right now for their fintech product. I don't know anything about, some of the stuff that he's doing is like really advanced, but he made an assumption about one of his team members. Like, he hired a guy from Stripe, and I said, well, and he's like not working out. And I said, well, did you check his references? Like, did you call the people and talk to him? He goes, no, I just assumed, I hired him from Stripe. Like that, I don't have to have financial service expertise to bring something up that is kind of like obvious, right? And so everybody has these lanes, and we all make these mistakes, and we are myopic and stuff like that. But we're also like, you're not like me. You're not the same age as me. You're not in the X thing. You don't truly understand. And they're not real reasons, but they're the reasons that we invent to protect ourselves from this new advice, which we know is right. But it requires change and effort and doing things differently. And it requires us saying, yes, you're right. And so instead we get defensive and we say, no, that won't work. You don't understand the industry, therefore this isn't working out, or this coaching isn't going great, or like, let's talk about something else. And so that's like a level 10 challenging conversation that you have to lean into. And what we do as coaches, the ideal situation we were just talking about this week as a coaching team, is that the best approach, and this is great advice for anybody who wants to help another person change any aspect of their life, whether it's your spouse, whether it's somebody on your team, it's Socratic questioning, right? It's you asking the right questions that get somebody to see that the solution, that gets them to see the solution in the first place, but also gets them to see the solution as their idea, so that now they are sold on it. And this is very much like a sales call, right? Like, you don't get on a sales call with somebody, whether you're selling $100,000 software, whether you're selling a $100,000 coaching program or whatever. You don't get on it and, you're not going to sell them by talking. You're going to sell them by asking the right questions and getting them to sell themselves on it. Why, there's a big problem right now, how the problem's not going to change unless something is done. What needs to be done is this. I need somebody who can show me this, and here's what here's the follow-up I need. Oh, that's interesting. That's exactly what we provide. That's how you sell somebody on something. And it's same with coaching is, all right, so what do you think is going to happen when this person comes in and interacts with the team? Oh, this is going to happen. And describe how that will change, the dynamics of the team and how far that will move you towards your goals. Well, it probably cause a lot of disruption. It probably set us back. And then, you just get them to walk through and talk it out. And eventually they come to the conclusion. And then you sit back and go, oh, that's a great idea. And they go, yeah, this is what I'm going to do. Awesome coaching session. That's the ideal that we're looking for. It's like Jedi mind trick 101.
Because there's a lot of truths in human nature that are across all of industries, and that's one of the big ones there too. Is in sales they talk about going deep discovery and listening. And I'm curious, for a lot of your clients, do they normally come to you when things are crashing and burning, or a lot of times they come when they're just crushing it too? When do they normally come see you?
Yeah, they normally come see us when they're wearing all the hats, they're spinning all the plates, and their hair is on fire. Those are like three of the most common phrases that we hear, in our applications, on our sales calls. And this can be a company that's, doing $10 million a year and profitable, but the business has grown so fast. The person has like 19 reports, people reporting to them, and they're overwhelmed, right? And so we get overwhelmed people who are like at $500,000 and they don't know what they're doing. And then the $10 million people who have grown too fast. And then the people that are, scaling exponentially. But it's usually because, oh my gosh, I'm doing way too much stuff and this is unsustainable. And it's unsustainable for my health, for my family, and for the business. The business is, not only will it plateau, but it might even, combust and blow up if something doesn't change.
That is powerful. And I think for entrepreneurs, we naturally are, even if you're just a high performance person, you want control. And a lot of times with wanting control is we can major in minor things. Like I think Ed Milet's, I think that's his line, but you major in all these little things and we're scared to delegate. And that's why I love your work, because this is something I struggle with. I am somebody who personally will attack everything, and I get down these rabbit holes and I'm like, wait, why am I actually doing this thing? And it just gets me nowhere,
Right. Well, that's the power of outside eyes. One of the things that we do that's really effective with our clients is first call, second call, we'll get on, we'll say, bring up your Google Calendar and let's audit this puppy. I call it calling the calendar, because there's too many meetings. There's meetings that don't have to happen. There's meetings that are too long. There's meetings that are more frequent than they need to be. And the next thing you know, we've got this calendar down. We use the phrase that most people's calendars look like a unicorn ate a rainbow and vomited up some Skittles, right? Like it's all these like 19 different colors, and there's like one little sliver of white. And by the end of the time after we've done this culling of the calendar, now we have these blocks of white, what we call white space. And you need white space on your calendar and you need white space in your brain. Because if you don't, then you don't have time to do the big thinking. And that's where you solve the problems. In fact, we try to force our clients to do a minimum of a single 90-minute walk in nature every week with nothing, with no AirPods in, like no audiobooks, no podcasts, no more inputs. You got enough inputs there. You just need time to create outputs. You need time to connect all the dots. And so we found that when people actually do that, they have huge breakthroughs. And if you go back in history and you look at Charles Darwin and Charles Dickens and all these composers from the 18th century, what did they do? They worked in the morning, so they wrote or composed, and then they went for 2 to 3 hour walks in the afternoon. And that's where the ideas came from that next morning were put into play. Then you go for the walk. Next morning, put it in play. And that's the cycle that more high-level people need to be at, because your most valuable work is not you hunched over your computer, trying to solve problems. It's you stepping back and thinking with the right prompts and having a different approach and letting your brain work different. Like it's research proven that your brain works different when you're away from your office. So when you're in the shower, everybody's had a great idea in the shower. Why? Because it's a novel environment, and everybody's had a great idea when they're out in nature. Like Sir Isaac Newton, where do you invent gravity? Not at a desk, under the apple tree. Like that stuff is not a cliche. It is really, really important. And so what you want to do is be ruthless with your calendar and say, man, some of this stuff has to go so that I can open up blocks of white space.
Ooh, there's a lot. I learned that naturally because for me, I struggled with that detachment, and especially when you're starting a business, like Tony Robbins says, like take a day to work on your business, not in your business.
Yeah.
And doing it in nature. That's why I go to Tahoe a lot. And last night before this podcast,
all the time.
Yeah, I go back and forth, man. I went to Santa Cruz yesterday actually to prepare for this podcast because I wanted to be in nature, be in the beach, and I said, let me get in Craig's zone. Let's see what because I read your book, but I try to go deeper to understand, right?
Yeah.
And nature allows us to do that, especially when we're busy.
Totally.
So, Craig, I know we're hitting up on time, and guys, make sure you get Craig's book, especially for your entrepreneurs. We have tons of financial services. A lot of you guys in Boston that are actually wealth managers. A lot of them listen to the show.
Nice.
All of you tech people, whether you're starting off. Craig, so last question. The next 5 years, like what are the most important values for you? I mean,
yeah, it's so our 5 core values for our family are love, honesty, freedom, personal responsibility, and independent thinking. And so right now our kids are 3, almost 2, and almost 1. And, our kids will be homeschooled. Our 3-year-old is bilingual in Spanish and English because they were all born in Mexico. They have second passports. We have all of our nannies speak Spanish to them all day long. And so we're starting the homeschool process with them now. We'll probably be in the Vancouver area. The nature here is just awesome. Mexico's too hot for me. And so we'll probably be here. And I'm already working on a couple of books. I'm working, I posted this thing, and anybody can comment, reach out to me directly for this because it was one of the most popular things I posted in the last 2 years is I have a politically incorrect manifesto for new dad, insanely ambitious entrepreneurs. Ooh. So every parenting advice out there is general stuff, and it's nice, and a lot of it's helpful. But if you're an insanely ambitious entrepreneur and you're having your first kid, it is a really difficult time. Because like if you're trying to run a startup and you have a baby, like you have 2 startups, right? And you have a relationship with your spouse, and no generic parent expert who makes $80,000 a year is going to understand the demands and give you the politically incorrect truth. So I wrote something about that. I have my little manifesto on it. So if anybody wants to reach out to me on Instagram, we'll get that. But I think I'm going to write a book about it because the response was so insane to it. So many people asked me for it. And then I'm also working on a book on networking because I have very strong introverted tendencies, but I've built a very large network and I do things different than, obviously schmoozing at events is not like, going to be a big part of my book, but I built a lot of my network from behind my computer. Like you and I have never actually met in person, unfortunately. Hopefully we do someday soon.
I love that. Yeah.
But we have a good connection and we know a bunch of the same people and, I've done most of it from not leaving my house, and there's a way to do that and build strong relationships.
Well, I'd love to reach, and those both can be really good podcasts, actually. But both of those topics are things that we hear all the time here. Craig, thank you so much for coming on. These podcasts are always full of depth, full of wisdom. I really appreciate you having on. Guys, make sure you give him a follow, get his book. Craig, thank you so much.
I appreciate it.